I went from designing big and prominent projects. I actually felt more anxiety about the small detached garage because there was like a higher level of ownership in designing it for my own firm, right?
Hello and welcome to Architecture Beyond. I'm your host, Brandon Aaron Gibbs, founder of the course platform Iamthestudio and director of Studio Motion Form. Architecture Beyond is an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their design and creativity gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. Be sure to listen to the end for your opportunity of connecting with Architecture Beyond. So hello and welcome to the Architecture Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Gibbs. In this episode of Architecture Beyond, we have a special guest, Joseph M. Cole, as an inspiring figure who has transitioned from community leadership and passion for architecture to becoming a successful firm leader at Culture, Architecture, and Design in Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
I am really glad to be here. Excited to have this conversation with you.
My first question is, could you share with us what initially sparked your interest in architecture and inspired you to pursue it as a career?
So, most people have some epiphany or some experience that draws them to architecture. I have literally always wanted to be an architect my entire life. As a kid, whenever my parents would take me into a grocery store, as soon as you enter the vestibule, there are these magazines that have property listings within them. So as a kid, instead of coloring books, I liked the property listing magazines. So I grabbed the magazines that had houses and apartments and other buildings that were up for sale, and I would bring them home from the grocery store, and I would literally redraw all of the buildings in those magazines, and I'd tell my parents, hey, I'm going to turn this building into a library, and hey, I'm going to turn this house into a duplex and rent it out. And my parents, they just thought it was a, passing interest, but literally I have been geared towards buildings and design my entire life. If I was an architect, I'm not quite sure what I would be.
Where did you grow up and how did that have influence on your architectural background?
I would say growing up in Nashville, as a kid, I would always tell my parents as we drove around the city that, hey, that building would be a cool apartment building, or hey, we should buy that house and renovate it. And I always saw the potential in Nashville, and it's funny now seeing the I guess expedited growth and rapid development of Nashville, because a lot of those things that I saw as a kid are becoming true now. I love this city. I love my city. I am very fond of my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee. So growing up here, it really influenced me to see the potential in the city. And now it's really interesting to grow as a designer and an architect as the city grows. So I feel like I'm developing at the same time as the city. I graduated in 2003. From high school, went to undergrad at University of Tennessee. Graduated in 2008, so graduated into the recession. So, things were a bit of a pause or a lull when I first graduated, but then Nashville saw a boom. And, as I got licensed and, started growing as a designer, as an architect, having more and more influence and decision-making capacity in the architecture, I've definitely seen the synergy in the path of me as an architect and Nashville as a city as a whole.
So it's definitely Nashville is a part of your story. How about schooling? How did sort of where you were trained or where you had your first experiences sort of shape you or inspire you?
I'll say with schooling, in architecture school, many of the students aspire to be starchitects or have a similar career path as the starchitects. So, your Frank Lloyd Wrights, your Mies van der Rohe, your Zaha Hadid. And in that, they want to design these huge, glamorous, awe-inspiring buildings that are on the cover of magazines. And for me, while I love design, I love architecture, that never really resonated with me because I didn't see the correlation between what we were studying and what we were designing in class and what I would see in my neighborhood when I went back home to South Nashville. And it was only until I started interning at the East Tennessee Community Design Center, where I was performing pretty much pre-design and schematic design services for nonprofits to help them raise money for their organizations. And I started seeing how design, architecture, planning, programming influenced communities that looked a lot like me. There was one experience I had in undergrad while interning at the Community Design Center. It was renovating a daycare that was, overcrowded but much needed within a community. And I was there measuring the building, and I thought I was by myself, measuring the exterior of the building. And, I happened to turn around and there was a kid there, and he was about 4 or 5 years old. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm measuring the building." And he was like, "Why?" And I was like, "Well, I'm an architect and I'm designing the building." And he was like, "But you have Jordans on." And I was like, "Well, so do you." And he was like, "But you're black." And I was like, "So are you." And the kid looked so perplexed. He sat there for a minute, he stared at me, and then he just ran off. So after I finished doing field measurements, I came in to tell the client, "Hey, I'm done, I'm leaving." And the client said, "Hey, we heard you met, Jimmy in the on the playground in the backyard while you're doing field measurements." And I was like, "Yeah, I met him, nice kid." And he was like, he came up to us and said, "Hey, do you know there's an architect in the back?" And they were like, "Yeah." And they were like, he asked them, "Did you know he was black?" And they were like, "Yeah." And then he walked off. And it's like, I really do believe that exposure is key. You can't be what you can't see. Often architects aren't in black and brown and underserved communities. So, I definitely do have a role in that. But if it wouldn't have been for that internship opportunity, I may have never found my true place in architecture.
That's an insightful story. You're the president of NOMA Nashville. Did that start before you started your own firm, or can you tell about your history sort of with that organization and how it's impacted your firm entrepreneurship?
My background with NOMA goes all the way back to undergrad. At UT, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, just like the profession at large, there were very few black and brown students, specifically black students within the program. And, I was passionate to get to know everyone within the college that actually looked like me. Um, so by through meeting everyone, we decided like, hey, let's start a NOMA chapter. So I, along with another student, chartered the NOMA chapter at University of Tennessee, and pretty much got it restarted. It had been there, and it pretty much had gone defunct as some students had graduated, and we got it restarted. So I've always been passionate about NOMA, even in undergrad. When I moved back to Nashville, we didn't have a chapter, but when I moved to New York, I actually had a opportunity to be in the New York chapter, which is known as NICOBA, and got really involved there. And it was great because, uh, surprisingly, New York is a very hard place to meet people. There are so many people there that already have their own things going. They're busy. They're working. They already have their clubs. They already have their friends, everything else. It was really tough for me to find my community there. Well, I found it with NICOBA. NICOBA was a great organization. They do, they have great programming within their chapter, because they not only focus on emerging professionals, but actually business owners. So it was a great time there. But when I came back to Nashville, Nashville had chartered a chapter a year or two before, and the president was Valerie Franklin with Moody Nolan, and the chapter was doing great. So she handed the chapter to me in great hands, and I took it over for 2 years as president. Um, and I was big on continuing the growth and maturity of the chapter. So in that we implemented a lot more programming systems, processes, and I really empowered the e-board. So kind of delegated tasks and got everyone really involved. But a lot of our time was spent planning the national conference, which was held in Nashville. We were just coming out of a pandemic, so this was really our first real conference outside of pandemic, so people are excited to get back to the conference. But also there was a level of excitement about Nashville. A lot of people hear about Nashville, that there are big things going on in Nashville, but you know, actually have never been here. So a lot of people came to the conference, and we wanted to make sure that when people left, they felt like Nashville owed them nothing. So we planned a lot of great professional programming, but we also planned a lot of social events, which I feel like are paramount in organizations like NOMA that are centered on community. And it was a great time. So a lot of my 2 years were centered on planning that conference, and now um, we ended last year with me turning over the reins to Asia Dixon. So Asia is now the current president, and I'm really excited for what she has um, in store for the next chapter of NOMA. The conference, we feel like, has given us a lot of momentum here in Nashville. Often you hear a lot of people say, "What is NOMA? Why do we need NOMA? Why can't you just join the AIA?" I think, especially here in Middle Tennessee, after them seeing the resounding success of the conference, the great programming, the amount of people that came to the NOMA conference, that people get it now. Firms get it now. Firm leadership gets why we need NOMA. We have just a lot of momentum that we're going to continue to keep rolling on with.
And the National Organization of Minority Architects is partnered with the American Institute of Architects and other organizations. That's a very unique perspective into architecture, in terms of community and leadership and giving back. I also hearing from our conversations about the different cities you've lived in and their impact. I guess, can you talk a little bit about that journey and sort of how did it get back to Nashville where you started?
Went to Knoxville, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I couldn't wait to get back home to Nashville. At the time, everyone was flocking back to Nashville. And then probably a few short months after we got here, I think a lot of firms realized, like, hey, this recession is going to be serious. And a lot of my classmates were laid off. So it was a pretty scary time in the profession. A lot of people that did have jobs stayed put because there wasn't anywhere else to go. But I was at a great firm, Thomas Miller and Partners, and it was by far the best place I could have been to start my architecture career. I learned a lot. I worked on a lot of great prominent projects. I built a lot of meaningful relationships. Overall, great experience to start my career. But I always knew that I wanted to be in a leadership role within the firm, and I wanted to have ownership within a firm. And I didn't quite see maybe the opportunity to have it there. Also, I have always been interested in business, whether it's before, when I was a kid and, trying to sell candy, or as an undergrad student, most of us were taking exclusively design classes. I was going out of my way and even taking summer school classes in order to get a business minor. I've just always been business oriented. So, while I was practicing, I realized, like, hey, there's a lot of business that goes on behind the scenes to make sure these projects are realized. And I wanted an opportunity to really understand business, and wanted to make that my superpower within architecture. So I decided that, hey, I wanted to get a top-notch MBA. I wanted to go to a top 20 school, and I enrolled in Emory University in Atlanta. On a consortium fellowship, which is a full ride. So got a six-figure scholarship to go get my MBA. So I got there, and I really wanted to study real estate because of the synergy with architecture. But while I was there, I realized, you know what, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to get exposure to everything unrelated to architecture. So I literally got a emphasis in marketing, entrepreneurship, general management. I studied all things tech and startup. I went and studied abroad. We studied the tech and startup and incubator scene in Southeast Asia. We went to Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand. Had zero clue how this would factor into architecture at all. But I got a job at Gensler, New York, in their tech startup and media studio. So it all came together. So had the opportunity to design some really prominent projects for, tech forward companies like IBM, Microsoft, you name it. We had opportunity to design it for those big companies, and it was a great experience. But over time, it was time for my wife and I to come back home, and we moved back home to Nashville. And I briefly worked for a small firm before I was laid off at the start of the pandemic. Um, I worked for a firm that was hit by a tornado the first week of March, and the second week of March, we started realizing that hey, this pandemic thing is serious. And then by the end of the month, I was laid off. And during that time, um, fortunately having an MBA, having the Gensler experience, being licensed, I had plenty of certifications. I could have easily gone to find another job. But I decided after having a conversation with my wife, she was like, "What would you do ideally if there was no pandemic, if money wasn't an issue? What would you go out and do?" And I said, ideally, I would love to teach, and I would love to have my own practice. Um, so she said, hey, you already started culture. I was moonlighting at night on projects that, weren't a good fit for the firm I was working for. And I was like, hey, let's turn this moonlighting thing into the real deal thing. And I hit the ground running. I started teaching at Tennessee State University in their architecture and engineering program remotely. I started teaching at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where I leveraged my MBA to start an entrepreneurship class. And then I was running my practice full time. And we were doing a little bit of everything from churches to commercial projects to residential projects. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but I'm really enjoying the ride. We're at a great point in our firm now where we're kind of turning over the leaf from the startup chapter into the validation and growth chapter. We're hiring, we're getting new projects, we're getting more prominent projects. So, I am excited about the next chapter. I feel like in the moment, my entire path of architecture has been rocky from, graduating to recessions, going through pandemics, moving around. But in hindsight, I realized that um, that was definitely God preparing me for where I sit now. So, I'm excited for what's to come with culture.
You are listening to Architecture Beyond, an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their gifts to impact the world beyond a studio. This podcast is produced by Iamthestudio, a premium resource for training architecture and design professionals in the top industry software. If you need help with learning design software and techniques to a professional level, please follow the link on our page.
It's very impressive. I love that story. I love that just everything falling together. I think everyone loves that. And especially after a major event like the recession, which like a lot of architects were affected by it. Either they couldn't find work, they were misplaced, or they're in the firm who had to cut people or projects. You answered one of the thoughts I think a lot of people were asking, sort of how did you transition from working in firms to your practice as a young architecture principal? But like, what was it really like, sort of from being I'm working for someone to I'm now a principal?
So, I could say that process was definitely scary at first, right? I think that whenever we as architects think about starting a firm, we almost treat it like a building, right? We want all of the plans designed and coordinated. We want the project manual. We want all the design documents before the building is built. If you wait until everything is perfected before you start your business, that is a terrible way to get into entrepreneurship. And you will make a lot of assumptions about what your clients like. So I'm a big advocate for starting before you're ready. So I teach a design entrepreneurship class at the University of Tennessee. And the whole concept of the class is most people think that you start a business and you pretty much implement steps and you move forward, right? But in entrepreneurship, it's all about iteration, right? It's about coming up with a hypothesis, figuring out how you can test that hypothesis, developing a solution, and then seeing if that solution works, right? And if it doesn't, you go back to the drawing board. So, with starting my firm, there were some assumptions I made at the very beginning that, everyone would, flock to culture because of my design background with Gensler, and they didn't, right? Because when people hire an architect, regardless of where they're hiring them from, they assume they're going to get great design, right? So I had to figure out what my clients really wanted. I will say that, I went from designing big and prominent projects, and I actually felt more anxiety about the small detached garage that I was designing on my own, right? Because there was like a higher level of ownership in designing it for my own firm, right? So, now I am really fortunate for the people we've had on the team, because the people on the team have done a great job of buying into the culture of the firm, no pun intended, and really developing ownership of the projects and just wanting to make sure that all the projects are successful and ultimately make sure that, our firm is successful.
That's very insightful. Well, what challenges did you face in establishing and leading your own architecture firm, and how did you overcome them?
I would say, there's quite a few challenges, starting as a full-time entrepreneur and a pandemic being one of them, right? How do you I had a company that was centered on placemaking where you couldn't go to places, right? Like, I'm starting a firm and we're exclusively doing things on Zoom, or whenever we're doing a site visit, we're standing like 10 feet away from one another, right? So it was very difficult in the initial phases of starting my business. I also say often there's a statistic that Black and brown businesses are often over mentored and underfunded, right? So there are plenty of programs out there that will provide mentorship and assistantship from high end advisors and big companies, right? But at the end of the day, it is literally cash is the lifeblood of a business, right? So, first off, there needs to be more programs that provide funding for Black and brown businesses. But that is something that definitely helped me. I work here in Nashville out of the Entrepreneur Center right now. And they had some grant opportunities that definitely assisted us in buying infrastructure and computers and helping us out and getting started. Also, Republic Bank giving us the community loan fund. In that community loan fund, it provided us with cash flow. That's pretty much like gasoline on the fire, right? There's only so much goodwill and bootstrapping and long nights you can do to grow your firm. Sometimes you actually need the cash to buy a computer and hire someone and get a desk. Like, cash is actually a real need. I will say another big break for us was teaming with Populous on the Vanderbilt athletics project. So right now we're working with Populous on a renovation of Vanderbilt University's football stadium, a $300 million renovation. We're working on a visiting team locker room. We're working on a basketball practice facility. Those have been great opportunities, right? So like our, cross section of our projects right now, the smallest is a detached garage with apartment above, and our biggest is a $300 million renovation, right? So we're literally touching a bunch of different project types. And it's, exciting time in our firm. We're going to start honing in on specific project types that are good and lucrative for us. And we're going to continue to look at other business opportunities.
That's awesome. And it's very exciting hearing about those projects. And I know I've seen some of those, and they're just to see them take shape. It's very inspiring. I guess, what is your approach to balancing business growth while maintaining design excellence, or that design look? Because I know you were talking about high end before. How do you figure that out? Because there's definitely a lot of things that bring in money, and the question is, like, how do you navigate that?
When it comes to design excellence, often architects, unfortunately, use design excellence, but really mean ego-driven design, right? They want something that is readily recognizable and attributed to them, right? But at the end of the day, you got to realize that it is not your building. It is the client's building. All right. So in that, you want to make sure that you design the best project possible within those parameters. Now, I will say that means that when you start a project, and when I say start, I mean from the initial consultation before contracts are signed, you have to make sure that the client that you're interviewing is in alignment with your overall firm goals, right? If the client that you're interviewing, if they're all about get it done quick, get it done cheap, right? They're not, the project is not going to be design excellence, regardless of how talented you are, right? You got to make sure that you're aligning yourself with clients that align to your overall business goals. That is just personally my own belief.
I guess, in what ways did your background as an architect influence your approach to entrepreneurship, and how did you leverage architectural expertise for that entrepreneurial endeavor? Would you have considered yourself an entrepreneur first or an architect first?
I would say, not to dodge a question, but I would consider myself a problem solver first. And I think being a problem solver is the root of being a architect, right? We are complex problem solvers that use design in our solutions. All right. So when it came to going back to business school, you know, we each had cohorts. And, in my cohort, we had someone who was an HR guru. We had a Fulbright scholar. We had someone who was literally a rocket scientist. And we had an accountant and we had an engineer. And literally all of us brought something different to the table in assignments. And for me, often what I would bring to the table was a comprehensive solution, right? Sitting back and assessing all of the various factors to come up with a solution. And I do attribute that to my background in architecture, right? Whenever we're coming up with a solution, you got to think about so many different things, from constructability to time to budget to client desires to is it aesthetically pleasing, right? And that type of problem solving directly impacts everything we do, from, how we structure our fees, how we allot and distribute funds within our business, what projects we go after, these job postings that we're about to put up. Like, it is all influenced by this level of design thinking that was fostered by starting as, a problem solver in architecture school.
You don't see that gap. You see that unified principle of solving problems. That's really insightful, and that's how architects should really approach that, I think, as well, to avoid that challenge, that big filter.
Yeah, it's like people look at it as either or, and it really is both and. It's there's synergy between the two. They're not separate.
I really think what you've done with NOMA and the work of the National Organization of Minority Architects is really it's a good model for architects. Like, I guess if you could talk about NOMA's founding, I know we don't have that much time, but the idea is, as a NOMA president, you're hitting on some of the challenges the architecture industry has had over the years. And so I was asking sort of what challenges have you encountered in promoting diversity? I guess that's diversity and equity is a big push.
DEI is definitely a big push right now, not only within architecture but business as a whole. My wife has her own DEI and inclusive leadership consultancy firm called Career Thrivers. So we actually talk about this pretty often, right? Because there are a lot of, I guess, what I would call problems within architecture that I think are isolated to architecture that she'll tell me, my wife Brittany will tell me, there's a through line between engineering, construction, finance, HR, tech. Like you'll see those same problems everywhere, right? So I'll say that there's clearly a problem right now with a lack of persons of color within the profession of architecture. That can only be corrected through, in my opinion, allyship. And allyship through um, um, people in leadership positions, primarily um, um, Caucasian people, to create opportunities for advocacy, for um, uh, increasing the pipeline of creating more Black and brown people within the profession of architecture, being intentional about hiring more people that are Black and brown, and then once they're within their firms, making sure that they get equal opportunity at leadership positions. I think that there's some unintentionality in leadership and promotion within our industry. Often people that are promoted look like and have very similar attributes and views of the ownership, right? Which leads to homogenous leadership within the profession of architecture. Most of the leadership within architecture is conservative white males, right? And that's because there's not an intentionality between having diversity within their leadership. And I also say that another way allyship looks is being intentional about partnering with Black and brown owned businesses, right? So there are very big companies that when they go after very prominent clients, the door is open for them automatically, right? Or why not partner with Black and brown businesses that bring something to the table, not just being Black and brown, but design prowess, new perspectives on design, to help build out your design team.
Yeah, I see the challenge as looking back on architects like Paul Revere Williams, who's in all his excellence and impact, the industry just is just like it was so limited, and the idea is now architecture is saying, hey, we want to help communities. It's foolish to say we're going to help your community, we're going to keep all the opportunity within our community. I think you want your entire city to flourish, and you want your entire community to flourish, and I think that's one thing I see NOMA is doing, is like revealing, hey, look, you stop looking at us helping them and seeing us as one community. I think that diversity breeding a unity is one way that we can see that, and I think NOMA is encouraging, and I think people are waking up to that, but there's a lot of distance to go for sure before essentially people aren't just saying, oh look, there's one Black guy who's an architect, and all I could be is a basketball player or an actress or actor. Well, we're almost done. I know the time frame. Thank you so much. I really want to talk about, but I have a question. What would you say to an architect, whether they're a minority or someone who just sort of has that challenge of saying, hey, I want to achieve a firm ownership one day? What would you advise them if they're just starting the industry or leaving school to get started on that path?
I would say for any designer within the profession of architecture and interior design, if you want to have an impact within our industry, you need to double down and hone in on your superpower. And I feel like your superpower is your outside interest and how they interrelate within architecture. So for me, I have always been interested in business, and I found a way to develop a synergy between the built environment and my passion for business. I think that designers and firms alike should really embrace the outside interest and figure out how to leverage that as a competitive advantage within their firm. You take Brandon. Brandon is a guru on all things architecture technology. He's great with interviewing and podcasting and amplifying people's voices. It would be a shame if Brandon only practiced architecture in a traditional way, right? No, like he has to embrace everything he's good at because it adds value to his employers, to his eventual firm, and to the profession as a whole. Hey, if you are a writer, then continue to write and figure out how to, integrate that within your practice of architecture. If you love film and movies, figure out how to integrate that within your practice of architecture. If you love floral design, figure out how to integrate it, right? We are not, people that can just leave, our personal interests at home and solely do architecture and then go back home and do what we really love. No, we got to figure out how to blend those things. And I think that the firms that create environments for their employees to blend those things are going to be the firms that really have some lasting value and, carve out a really strong competitive niche within our market.
It's very insightful and very valuable. Everyone has a superpower. They need to have that active. I guess one final thing, can you let us know how to get in touch with culture and the work of Joseph Cole, and maybe prospective employees, people who just want to learn from what you have to say?
So definitely, we would love to hear from anyone that is interested in joining the team. You can find us on our website at designwithculture.com. Also follow us on Instagram, Culture, Architecture, and Design. Follow us on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me, Joseph M. Cole, at LinkedIn. But I look forward to hearing from the architecture community. We got a lot of great things going on in culture, and we can't wait to just let the world know. We're going through a bit of a brand refresh now, but we are going to be unveiling a lot of projects. It has been a whirlwind over the last 3 years, but we have knocked out quite a few projects. Like Brandon, right now we have 6 projects under construction. Like we're rocking and rolling right now, and I'm excited to let the world know what we've been working on.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for joining us, Joseph. This has been Brandon. I'm your host for Architecture Beyond. Thank you for joining us, and check the links in this episode to find out more about Joseph and his work, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for joining us today on the Architecture Beyond podcast. Today, we had the pleasure of hearing the entrepreneurial story of architect Joseph Cole, overcoming adversity and setbacks to launch the successful and inclusive architecture firm Culture, Architecture and Design. You can find out more about Culture, Architecture and Design at culturearch.com. If you are interested in learning more about the newest design software and techniques, visit our sponsor Iamthestudio at iamthestudio.com and sign up with our newsletter Design Insights Weekly.
In the next episode of Architecture Beyond, we will explore the link between the art of sketching and the craft of architectural ideas with design expert, design sketching author, Alma Hoffman. Be sure to check it out. This has been Brandon and the Architecture Beyond crew. Catch you in the next episode.